Okay, a few of you and most of the professors. Fair. All right, before we get started, I'm going to ask you all, if you don't mind, to go to this website. It's called Menti. So that's MENTI.com. And the code, just in case you can't see it, is 5690-6412. And I promise those really small options should be bigger on your phone or laptop, whatever you're using. So I'll repeat the code again just in case you need it. It's 5690-6412. And then hopefully you'll be able to just pop your answer right in there. For this first one, you can select all that apply. I'm very interested to know where you receive news at the time. And so, just like your professor was saying, I've actually been following that University of Idaho case for quite some time. I'm actually on some groups where people talk about it, and it gives me nightmares. So if you are also interested in that, just the trigger warning was very good. All right. So I will give it a couple of seconds still. But it seems like most of you are answering. Awesome. All right. So the vast majority, social media. Fair. I also get a lot of my crime news there. Some TV. Okay, for the other, do any of you want to volunteer where you're getting that news from? No. Okay, that's fine. I'm just curious. All right, so we're going to switch gear. There's another question. And there is a correct answer. But if you had to guess, how many minors, so people under 18 of color, were reported missing in 2021? In the U.S., I should contextualize that. I would say there's no wrong answer, but there is. So, okay, good guesses. Yeah, nobody's saying 25,000. All right, a couple more seconds. So, well, those of you who said 138,000, raise your hand. Good job, you're correct. It is 138,000, which is an extremely high number. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. First, I am going to pull this back up. All right, and you probably recognize one of those faces on the screen, maybe both. So I always give an outline. I don't want you to wonder, like, what are we doing? So here is the order. I'll introduce you to critical criminology a little bit, very briefly. And I'm going to tie it into news-making criminology and looking at how the media can dictate who we see as a victim. And being validated as a victim is very important for one's self-worth and also to just receive justice in the criminal justice system. We'll also talk about how this kind of communicates who the ideal, in quotes, victim is. And then I'll have an activity for you that we'll do very quickly and a case study, and then I'll open it for questions. All right, so critical criminology is this branch of criminological theory. And for the most part, it just looks at these inequalities that exist in our society, in particular within our criminal justice system and criminology. So it suggests that these inequalities are not accidental. So these are not just accidentally perpetrated, right, or continuing. Instead, they're claiming that there's individuals in power who are going to reinforce their power, oftentimes by keeping others at a lower status or diminishing their experiences. So, unfortunately, this is also true with our media. And Dr. Barrett coined the term newsmaking criminology first in 1988 and then again in early 2000s. And he, to critical criminology's context, was saying, indeed, the media does have a lot of power. So the media has a lot of power in discussing what is most important or what news you are supposed to receive and care about, and this is definitely true about crime. I often do not watch the news on TV, I'm just going to be honest about that, but whenever I do, usually it's on in my family's home, I see crime reports. I don't think you can go a day without seeing crime in the media. And oftentimes you'll see different people will be represented. We could have a whole conversation about who is most likely to be represented as a criminal or offender, but that would be a whole different topic, very worthwhile though. So it communicates what crimes we should be paying attention to, what's worthy of our attention, and also which victims are worthy of acknowledgement. That's not to say that victims who receive attention don't undergo a host of problematic experiences like victim blaming. However, there are some victims who receive more attention than others. And this is going to not only give them more validation and their families more validation, it's going to dictate who gets resources from law enforcement. Okay, and that's going to be really influential in terms of solving cases, finding missing people, and just communicating, right, the proceedings of the crime to the public. So Dr. Barrick also coined a few terms. I don't actually know if he did, but he communicates them, I should say. So the first one is media pluralism, and this just suggests that as we continue to advance in technology, we have more and more medium to pull news stories from. So for example, when he first created this idea of newsmaking criminology in 1988, I do not think he ever foresaw that we would have TikTok, right? Now we have TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I don't even know how many others. I've been reading reports of the University of Idaho case, and somebody mentioned something called like VSCO. Never heard of it, don't know what it is. But again, this is seemingly true. We're seeing all these new platforms people can access. At the same time, he predicted we'd have message pluralism, which just suggests that as we continue to develop these platforms, we develop new messages. I would just like to suggest that maybe that is not the case, that we're seeing the same messages over and over and over. Maybe the names or the faces change, but the same stories are being broadcasted. And this is the cool part. He talks about how criminologists, in particular academics, but all of you, have the responsibility of bringing injustices to light in the media and also redirecting attention to those crimes we should pay attention to, which of course all of them, and all victims. So that is kind of the inspirational part of this. So please don't get bogged down in thinking this is all depressing. It is, but there is some hope at the end of the day, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so the idea of missing white woman syndrome came about by a professor, Dr. Parks, and though she coined the term, it was really publicized by a journalist, and her quote is there. So she was at a journalist conference, and she was just talking about different cases that receive attention. And so to the idea of missing white woman syndrome, she said, if it's a missing white woman, you are going to cover that every day. And so she's talking about how she's suggesting that other victims aren't going to receive that attention, but they're going to latch on to that missing white woman. So I'm going to give you a few examples from different studies just to give you some evidence of this. And as I mentioned, this was coined again by Dr. Parks and popularized by Gwen Ifill. However, it's still understudied. So that's a problem I hope to address. However, there's not much research on it. Right now there's a few studies that are coming about, but we're not really talking about it very much. I will say the Gabby Petito case did bring this to light. So how many of you followed at least a little bit the Gabby Petito case? Yeah, okay, the vast majority of you, good. I'm not saying, too, I should preface this, I'm not saying that Gabby Petito and women like her don't deserve justice or to be in the media. I definitely think they do. Any victim deserves justice. However, I'm just pointing out there's disparities, okay, and we're going to talk about those. So this was from Slakoff and Fridella, pretty recent, 2019. And so what they did was they looked at FBI data. There's this website if you're interested. It's called, you can search the National Crime Information Center. Okay, and that information comes from the FBI. They have different sections up top. You can see missing individuals. And these are people who have been officially declared missing. So they're looking at this. That's where they're getting these estimates here about race. So of missing individuals, what percentage are white, what percentage are black, and then other. Interestingly, Hispanic individuals are still counted in white, so this isn't necessarily accurate, but nonetheless, it's still a really good estimate. Another source, though, says that of missing people, Black individuals actually approximate 40%. So this might be a little inaccurate, but again, it's what they found from the FBI. They look at 11 different print sources, so different sources across different years, the most recent being 2017 and 2018. And they look to see, all right, how often are these different individuals by race represented in news stories about missing people? And so you'll see that there is a lot of stories about white people who are missing at 68.04%. Interestingly, if you look here at Black individuals, 33.84, maybe even closer to 40% of missing people, but only represented about almost 20% of the cases that make the news. So they're underrepresented by anywhere from 14 to even 20%. So that's a big disparity. The other racial category, it includes other races. So one that is interesting to me is the indigenous population. They are also included there. And though they're comprising 3.74% of missing individuals, we do see that the media covers them more often, though definitely not as often as white individuals. So if you look over here, you'll see that this is the little chart where you can see the over or underrepresentation. So white individuals overrepresented. So if you look online, you probably think, oh my gosh, white individuals face this huge risk of going missing. And that's somewhat true, but not quite to the extent that it seems. And so then you'd also think, well, Black individuals don't go missing very often, but you'd be incorrect. And then the same is true as white individuals, that it's overrepresented in the media for individuals of other races. All right, so that's some evidence. We're going to look at some more. All right, and this is going to be by sex, gender. It depends on the term they use. They're talking about biological sex, though. So Somers, he looked at this in 2016, and he talks about how being white has benefits, in particular in the media when it relates to crime. So more often than not, if you are a white victim of crime or you go missing, your story is more likely to receive media attention. He also stipulates that this is especially true if it is a white victim with an alleged Black perpetrator, which comes from a long history of stereotypes, and this can be problematic because when you look at the media, if you're not well versed in criminology, which most people in the public aren't, you would think, okay, that means that as a white person you're at an increased risk of being victimized by somebody who identifies as Black or African American, and that's actually not true. It's usually going to be somebody of the same race. All right, so there's also benefits that go along with sex and gender in media portrayals. So here are some of them. And you can see it's pretty close, actually. So per the FBI, of the people who are missing, a little more than half are male, a little under half, 48% are female, but it's flipped here, right, in terms of who the media is covering. So you're going to see a lot more emphasis on females, less so males, and that is compelling. I do a lot of research that I have to publish, but research that I've done, my dissertation is all about male victims in particular of crime. They don't receive a lot of attention. They also struggle to receive help and validation when they do experience victimization. So the media doing this does not help them any. So it does have consequences. I don't want you to think, oh, this is not a big deal. We're going to talk about it, and I'll show you some case examples of that. All right, so this is also from Somers. He then broke it down by sex and race. So you can see here the percentage of media coverage. And he looked at 3 different prominent news sources, one of them being Chicago, one of them in Atlanta, and one of them in Minneapolis. And he was comparing and contrasting those locations. So here you can see, I'll just go through them really quickly, and then we'll see the glaring one, the one that is the elephant in the room. So of the media coverage, Black females who are missing get approximately 9%. Black males, less so at 3.7%. Hispanic females, almost 15%, good, but still not nearly as much as others. And we're going to see that Hispanic males have not very much coverage. Same for other females. Other males, very little coverage. And then here we go, right? So we're talking about white females, almost 50% of media coverage. which is a lot of coverage compared to others who are missing. White males, only 17%, but still far more than any other group. So we're seeing some connections here between race and gender or sex. And this kind of goes back to something I look at with victim blaming. So Christie was really, really influential in talking about the ideal victim. This is something that people talk about today. You might have heard of it as people saying the, in quote, perfect victim. But the ideal victim is somebody who is going to receive more preferential treatment in the criminal justice system because he or she fits into these categories. Okay, so these are the criteria. Typically weak. I'll give you an example in a minute too. Engaging in a quote-unquote respectable activity, right? That's subjective, up to your interpretation. Not to be blamed, although I will say that doesn't mean people will not do so. People will definitely blame the victim, unfortunately. And there's usually this big bad offender who you just couldn't possibly fight off, and they're typically going to be portrayed as a stranger. If any of you have taken any classes, or even just looked at sexual victimization, for example, you'll see that people think it's this stranger lurking in the bushes, right? But it's not true. It's usually not a stranger. In fact, the vast majority of sex crimes are perpetrated by somebody known to the victim. So what does that mean for people who are victims of sexual violence and they know the person, right? They've just not fit in with that ideal victim. And this is not my feelings, this is just how this phenomenon works. They're also supposed to be powerful enough to make their case known without threatening other interests. So we talked about critical criminology and how there's people in power who don't want to give that power to other individuals. Now with the media, it's a little different. So they'll talk about profits, and they're going to talk about the cases that they feel will get them the most money. Again, this is problematic. I used to have a professor who said, we don't want to hear a story about a dog biting a man. We want to hear about a man biting a dog, right? These outrageous cases. So when we're talking about power here, there might be some evidence, which we're going to see, that individuals who have certain skin tones or certain identities will get this power. It's not their fault, it's just the privilege that is given to them. So the question then becomes, who deserves to be called or validated as a victim? Bless you. Who deserves to be considered a victim, right? And the question is a very loaded question, right? We can look at this for a long time, but according to the media, there's only a select few individuals. What are some problems that come with this? So can you think of any problems with us only paying attention to those that are considered ideal victims? Any problem? No? Okay, well, I'll give you some ideas. If you think of some, you can chime in. So some examples could be, first and foremost, that we're seeing misrepresentation of crime. So people, again, like I said, think, oh, if I'm a white person, I am most likely to be victimized by somebody who is Black or African American. Not true. Also, you're going to think that individuals who go missing and they're of a certain background are just ideal victims, which is harmful because victims often blame themselves anyway, and now you're going to be adding in this other element of shame and blame. But also, it's problematic because offenders are going to get away with a crime. If they perpetrate it against somebody who's not an ideal victim, those odds increase. And we're going to see some problems in the criminal justice system with sentencing. So some offenders will receive harsher sentences based on who they victimize, while the opposite is also true. So show of hands, how many of you know who Brock Turner is? Okay, again, mostly professors. Okay, so I'll just give you a little insight really quickly. Brock Turner was a student, he was a swimmer at Stanford University, and he was convicted of sexually assaulting a female named Chanel Miller who came forward. They had witnesses in this case, eyewitnesses who said, we stopped him. which is not common in a lot of these crimes. You don't typically see eyewitnesses in cases of sexual victimization. And yet the judge gave him a sentence of 6 months in jail, and he only served 3 months. Conversely, if you look up any African-American male in the news who allegedly victimized a white female in particular, that's going to be a much lengthier sentence. Does it matter? Hopefully you know the answer is yes. It's up to your interpretation again. All right, so to prevent anybody from cheating, though you would never do that, we are going to put our phones away so we can't Google them. But I'm going to give you a little sheet. I'm not going to take them back, so no judgment. I will say, too, as a professor, I always talk about being a really good writer and spell checking and double checking your work. And then today, I realized in my haste to print these and leave yesterday, there's a typo. So I did correct that, and if you're wondering what that word is, I put it there for you. So I am going to pass these out.
Do you want to? I can help.
Sure, thank you. I'll steal. Would you mind passing that? Thank you. All right, so we're going to take some time, and you are going to, without looking at your phone or Google or whatever, just off the top of your head, if you recognize any of these names, not just recognize them, but if I were to ask you who they are, in a sentence you could tell me, then check them off. If you know of the name, but you're like, I don't know who that is, I don't know, maybe put half a check, maybe put a star. If you don't know, leave it blank. Okay, so a lot of names there. And I should tell you too, this isn't necessarily individuals who were murdered, but maybe missing and or murdered. So I'll give you some time to do that. Some names might just jump out at you automatically. Others, maybe not so much. Do you want to do it too?
Yes.
Okay.
I think everyone has.
Good. Thank you. Is anybody missing one? No? Okay. I'll give you some time. And if you don't know, it's okay. Just, if you know, we'll talk about that. And who you know. While you're doing that, just by show of hands, how many of you listen to true crime podcasts? Ooh, okay, good. Any in particular podcast you follow? No? No crime junkies? No. Okay, well, I'm just asking because some of them might have had their cases covered on these. And while you're doing that, I'll just tell you too, if you're interested in learning more about individuals who've gone missing that aren't white, one of my favorite podcasts to listen to is called Black Girl Gone, and it talks about missing women of color. Some of them have been murdered, sadly. Others are just missing. So if you want to learn more, it's definitely entertaining. Listen to her. She's a great speaker, but also you learn a lot. All right. How many of you are still working on this? We're ready? Okay, let's just go through the names. First of all, do any of them stand out to you? Do any of them immediately you said, I knew who that is? Yeah. Gabby Petito. Okay, fair. We just talked about that. Good answer. Yeah. Any others? Dr. Mullen? Good. How many of you know Shanquella Robinson's story? Okay. A few of you? Okay, and I actually saw that on social media. And it's been circulating. It's a very sad case, so look it up if you're interested. She is a murdered person of color. She was murdered while on a ship with her friends in Mexico. Okay, any other names? Yeah.
JonBenet Ramsey.
JonBenet Ramsey. How many of you know JonBenet Ramsey? Well, not know her, but of her. Okay, most of you? Yeah, very sad case. I'll just also ask then, how many of you know who Relisha Rudd is? Okay, so she also was a missing, murdered young child, and she was black. So nobody knew who she was. John Benet Ramsey's case, of course, though, has been mainstream media for decades. So, okay, any others? Yeah.
Kanika Jenkins.
You know, okay, good. How many others know Kanika Jenkins' story? Good. Did you watch the video?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, they didn't say she was murdered. Do you think she was murdered?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, me too. Very interesting case. I think it was Chicago. She was at a hotel with some friends partying, and then there's like a video on YouTube. It's really weird, it's kind of creepy, but she's walking around this hotel. Now again, keep in mind she's probably intoxicated. Not anything to blame her, but that might explain where she's like walking kind of and not knowing where she's going. She is found in a freezer that she can't get out of. So, I don't know. I'm not gonna go too far into that, but yeah, I'm glad you know her name. Okay, any others? Dr. Malone?
I think Jelani Day.
Yeah, Jelani Day. How many of you know Jelani Day's story? Okay. He went missing at the exact same time as Gabby Petito. And we're gonna talk about that. Okay, any others? No. Okay. So nobody knows the case of Alexis Ware. She's currently missing from the Greenville area, and she is a woman of color. I believe she's also a mother, but I could be wrong about that. And so that is currently in the news, maybe not as much so as others. I'm surprised too, and maybe I'm just too far into true crime, that none of you recognize the name Brittany Drexel. She actually went missing in Myrtle Beach, and I think it was 2009 maybe. They just solved her case recently. Okay. So yeah, most of you knew names who were, people rather, who were white. One of them too on here is Megan Kanka, so Megan's Law is named after her, and she was a missing and murdered white child. Still very sad, but again, we're not seeing representation of all racial groups or identities in the media. And I'm only talking about race and sex right now, but you could look at a whole host of other identities and whether or not they are covered in the media. Even looking at whether or not they engage in those respectable activities, in quotes, what their income level is or their family income, so on and so forth. All right, so for our case study, I'm glad somebody recognized that name. We're going to discuss them. So who can tell me anything whatsoever about Gabby Petito's case? Yeah.
She was like traveling with her fiance in like their van that they like lived in, and there was like multiple times they got like pulled over, and you could see like that the husband was very like hostile, and she was like a social media influencer, so she had like a presence,
Mm-hmm.
and then he killed her and like went like rogue, like went completely off the script, like no one knew who he was.
Yeah.
And he was like a note was found with him, I think,
Mm.
about like admitting that he did it, and he also like killed himself after.
Yeah. Very, very detailed. Good job. Erin, is that your name?
Yeah.
Good answer. Yeah. So, very correct, spot on. This was September 2022. Thank you. I should know that. But yeah, so 2021, at the same exact time, Jelani Day is going missing. And we're going to talk about his case in a minute. But Gabby Petito's case took the nation by storm. Students in my class were on their phones looking at it, talking about it. We spent some time in class looking at what was happening. But yeah, essentially, she was traveling. Erin was very correct. She was traveling with Brian Landry, and there was a case too where the police pulled them over, I think in Utah, and alleged that she had perpetrated violence against him, but others who called in said they saw him hitting her. In any case, the police came and separated them. In hindsight, I'm sure they're probably like, oh no, I wish I would have done more, it's not their fault. But yeah, he drove home in her van to Florida without her. And so people were like, what's going on? Her family on September 10th or 11th reported her missing, and the FBI took action pretty much immediately. I will say too, her body was found, I want to say it was September 19th, and they just described it as a body that remains that are consistent with a white female blonde hair of that age. 2 days later, her family got the confirmation, unfortunately, that it was Gabby and that she had been killed while on her trip. So, to that point that Erin was making as well about Brian and being found in Florida, they had so many resources at their disposal. The FBI, the local police, state police, they were all pulling their resources together and searching swamps in Florida looking for him. At the same time, many other cases, not just these two, but Jelani Day also went missing. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. So he had dreams of becoming a doctor. He was actually, I believe, in his master's program in Illinois, and he went missing. His mom automatically knew that something was wrong. So the last image they have of him is at a dispensary, and then you don't hear from him, you don't see him again. And then they find his car, kind of abandoned on the side of a road in some bushes. A couple days later, they find his body in the river. Okay. Interestingly, he was an avid swimmer and was on the swim team. So his mom says, interesting, because she believes that he likely did not die on his own. I would like to kind of look at some of the details of the case, okay? So, whenever they found his body, they told his mom, hey, we found a body. They didn't say it was male, female, any identifiers. 9 days later, they tell her it has been confirmed that it is a male who fits his description. I was listening to a podcast, go figure, about him, and they were talking about how at the time they were trying to confirm his DNA. The coroner's office or medical examiner's office didn't have the dye they needed to confirm it or something, and it would take 19 days for it to arrive. Do you think that could have been solved quicker? I believe it could, right? Somebody could have driven that to them. They could have pulled resources. So his case just went slower and slower, and his mom is all the while, and his whole family, waiting for justice, waiting to know what happened to him. So she had to galvanize support from her family and friends, and even local strangers who wanted to help. They organized searches. The police did not at first. This was all her own doing to try and find him. And so the whole time, she was saying things about him, trying to get him in the media, trying to get police to pay attention, and she was saying things like, he's a good boy, he's a good man, he is trying to become a doctor, he's a good student. At the same time, though, Gabby's going missing, and people are saying nice things about her, but nobody has to say she's a student, she's a good person. And this is something they found in their research, that oftentimes if the person is not white that's missing, there's qualifiers that are used, certain words to describe the person to get you to pay attention more. So they'll say things like good person, good student, not engaged in crime. Some of them even have to say not in gangs. And a person is missing, right? So it really shouldn't matter what the context is, but yet they have to say that. I mean, if Gabby is engaged in crimes, it still doesn't invalidate her experience, and shouldn't invalidate his either. Also with people who are missing, and they're missing people of color, we see that police have sometimes put up mugshots of them in their missing person flyers instead of, I don't know any other picture they have. I'm sure they have other pictures. And so this might signal to viewers, oh, this person maybe is an offender, has been convicted of something, which, again, no problem should be had there in determining that that person's still worthy of being found, and yet most people in society go, oh, okay, I'm tuning out. And so that is a problem. So that is the case study I have for you, just to kind of point those differences out. And here's the end of my presentation. I put my personal email there in case you want to contact me afterwards, so feel free to do so. But do any of you have any questions?